So yeah, Andy and me are going to chat a little bit about the project, do a bit of a do a bit of an introduction to what the project's all about, and give you a few demos as well. It's quite fun. We were just sort of joking about this, really. How fun is this project? I think you have to be a bit of a digital preservation geek to find it fun, but hopefully you are all digital preservation geeks, and Andy's pointing to perhaps the biggest digital preservation geek here. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. There are some quite nice things. A lot of it's quite visual as well. We're sort of diving into some registry stuff, some file format stuff with lots of quite interesting graphs. So I hope you enjoy it. Where should we start? Part of the journey goes back to iPres in 2022 in Glasgow. We had a workshop on digital preservation registries, and quite a few of us came together from across the community, and we were really talking about some of the challenges in taking forward our capability in this space, really. Registries of information about all aspects of digital preservation that should be helping practitioners solve digital preservation problems, but actually they're often quite difficult to get to that information, to discover it and to make it useful. And it's all a little bit isolated as well. So and there's also, I suppose, an issue around not really having quite enough resource in this area. So there's some fantastic institutions that are continuing to take forward some of the digital preservation registries, and there's a lot of volunteers out there contributing to them as well. But we could do with a bit more, do a bit more support. So we were thinking about what support could be provided to kind of connect the registries a bit more. So after that workshop, I think it was the next day, there was a session that Andy actually spoke on. There were a number of speakers talking about registries, and I found that kind of very inspiring and sort of energizing, really. And I came away from that really wanting to take this forward in some way. And I was chatting with colleagues from Yale University and sort of pitching an idea, really. You know, I was stood next to a poster. We're in the sort of poster session room. There was this fantastic poster describing experiences in preserving digital photogrammetry. So 3D objects that have had lots of 2D photographs taken of them in order to build up a 3D image from that. How do you go about preserving that information? So there was this really great poster that described the work that they did, and then it had like 10 points of the things that you should do if you're going to preserve photogrammetry data. Fantastic resource, you know. If you're out there doing some work and you come across this data and you want to preserve it, this is the reference point for you. But I knew that straight away this poster was going to disappear into the proceedings of iPres and be very undiscoverable, be hard to find. So that was part of the idea of the project, to kind of make some of these resources that are scattered across the internet a bit more discoverable, but also to dig specifically into some of the file format issues as well. So some of the things we're going to talk about today, sort of in those two different areas, but that's a sort of a very quick introduction. So we're going to do a bit of a double act today. So I'll pass to Andy, who's going to tell us a bit more about what we're going to cover today.
Yeah, so that is the rough agenda, and this is more focused on this project. So the Registries of Good Practices is the project that came out of those conversations, and that I've been hired to the DPC to continue. So we're going to talk a little bit about the principles of the project, the project itself and the principles, and then kind of how we oriented ourselves, the landscape and the focus of registries. Then we're going to give a couple of demos, one about the Digital Preservation Publications Index, and talk a bit about registries, and then there'll be another demo about a new thing we've created called the Workbench, and then we'll talk about some next steps. So that's the rough outline. Do you want to say something about have you covered enough of the project, or?
Probably I'm just thinking if there's anything else to say. That's probably quite a reasonable introduction. Should we just dive into it?
Yeah, let's go.
Say a bit more about the structure.
From my point of view, there's like three main strands. So there's work to understand what the kind of current landscape of active and openly accessible registries are for things like formats and software and tools, and how they're actually being used in practice. So resist the temptation to abstract and academicize, and just understand how things are being used. Coupled with that is the idea of like how do so that's like practical registers, I think of that, and then there's how do practitioners work towards good practice, and could a registry of practice help? So how do we support practitioners who want to improve, and how does that play with the information sources that they've got available? And then a third strand, which is like the practice of registries. It's like, what are the common practices used to build and maintain technical registries? Some of our registries have been around for 2 decades now. Certainly Paul and I have seen a lot of projects come and go where registries were made and then died very quickly. So understanding what makes a registry survive, and what makes it practical in itself is part of that work as well. So they're the three main strands we're looking at. And then we started to come up with some principles to align our work. And again, this is very much based on both Paul and my experience of other projects going back to the Planets project. Some of you might remember back in, when did that start? I can't, anyway. It's when I joined the field, so it's a long time ago.
Quite a long time ago. Yeah,
Yes.
15 years ago.
Yeah,
Like
my hair and beard didn't look like this
yes.
then. That's I'm certain. So the absolute first principle was the principle of this project is we are not making any new registries. This is about linking and discovery and finding stuff. We're not one of those projects going to come and say, no, you should all do it like this, and then disappear after 2 years of funding. That's not the goal. We very much want to empower others. It's not about the things we create. It's about working out how people work and helping them support their work and do more. Be realistic and be useful. These might sound really obvious, but we've seen more sophisticated projects come and go and not focus on what's realistically possible to use in practice and what's genuinely useful to practitioners. They've been too far removed from. They've been grand visions to aim towards, but too far removed from what happens on the ground to really take. We also want to prove that it's realistic and useful. We need feedback. So we're trying to, not disappear for 2 years and build one thing, but release prototypes every few months, iterate early, often, and wherever possible in the open. Not everything's safe to do in the open, of course, but we'll try and work in the open as much as we can. And again, a big strand of this is building on the work of others. So we don't want to duplicate work. We want to highlight, interlink work, find duplication, raise up other people, but make it all easier to discoverable. And finally, so far, I'm sure we'll get more principles along the way. Whatever we do build, we're going to try and make it as maintainable and sustainable as possible. So they're kind of our guiding points.
So this sort of agile approach is really why we're here today. That we've sort of got to a point where we've released another demonstrator that we talked about a bit at the iPress conference last week, and we're still sort of continuing to share that. So we'd really like to get feedback from you guys. You know, we want you guys to dive in and try out what we've been working on and give us some feedback on it. So hopefully we entice you into doing that a little bit today.
Yeah. So as part of that, as we were scoping the work, I started looking at all the different information sources that are involved in practice. This was the kind of the landscape survey I talked about, and ended up with this excessively incomplete map of digital preservation registries. And there's all of these layers are important when we're doing digital preservation, right? There's hardware and the software, the storage media, libraries, formats, tools, actions, workflows, and kind of the practices sitting on top. And we got so far down this line, I started doing this and making this diagram, and then I realized, oh, I'm making a registry of registries, aren't I? And it was going to turn into this massive thing of trying to find every possible source, and it was already getting too far away from the goals. So at some point, we had to just kind of, it was a helpful. I think a regular feature of this project is letting our scope spread a bit, and then realizing we need to pull back focus, right? So we got this far and went, nah, this isn't the right thing to do. We decided to focus in on two areas. So we're going to start with, as we've hinted, format information. So pooling practical reference information across sources about formats, and publication information. So we treat publications in the field of digital preservation as records of practice that we need to help bring together. And then later in the project, we'll start to look at tools and workflows. And really, I think most importantly, linking together the organizations and people who have common goals and common practices. So that's how we've shifted focus in the project. And then we're going to switch to a demo. So I'll pop some links in the chat in a second. I didn't realize when I built it, it's two prototypes. It's two experiments, this experiment. One part of it was bringing together all the iPress proceedings and effectively creating a kind of journal of iPress so that you can, search engines and everyone can have a home page for the proceedings. But then there's also building a little index on top of that so you can search across it all. So I'm going to switch now and do some stuff. If you give me a brief second, I shall.
I've just dropped a link in for the publications index, but plug in the chat for what he's about to demo.
Oh, cool. I'll just give me a second. Also, we might need that's the feedback link for this part, which you might need maybe. So now I'm going to share the right thing. Right. So if you go there, it should look like that. Hopefully. So hopefully you can see the
That's coming through great, Andy.
Okay, cool. So hopefully you see the Digital Publications Index. Lots of clear noting to make sure it's experimental, but nonetheless, I think this is going to be quite useful. So, as I said, it's really two things which I didn't quite realize at the time. The first is this. So, what I started with was the information which is on the iPres conference homepage, but which is this list of all of the iPreses and where their resources are, which was incomplete on the iPres conference's homepage. So I started there and started building up this big list of all of the iPreses all the way back to 2004 and where the proceedings are stored. And then from those sources, I started gathering the metadata together to give each year its own homepage. And then within each year, give it all of the papers its own homepage. So this is kind of the journal of iPres part. This is useful. It means search engines can find stuff in one place, but it doesn't steal focus from like the hosts that have kindly agreed to host the publications. It defers to them. It tries to take itself out of the loop as much as possible, just be a discovery path. Because if you go and view it, this will take you to Phaedra, which is run out of the University of Vienna and has been for many years, and that's where the actual paper. Oh look, it's that thing. Oh, I didn't want that in my presentation. Anyway.
Take your bingo.
Oh yes,
your
if anyone's
bingo
had the
card now. Now we've seen
yeah.
your time.
And so this has some nice features. If you get to here and you're using the Zotero or another citation manager, you should be able to go to one of these pages and pull it into your citation index as a appropriately marked up publication. So that's hopefully useful. So one side of this is just bringing all of the data together in one place so it's easy to find. But then once we have that, we can make it searchable. So there's like a fancy search system here which does faster searching. I'm not going to get into that today. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But if you're interested in an emulation, then you can search for emulation and you'll find every paper that mentions emulation in the title or abstract or keywords from the iPres history. And Klaus Reckert will probably have written all of them. And then if you're interested in linked data, then you can explore that. Or floppy disks. Right. So what was that thing you mentioned earlier, Paul?
Yeah, so going back to Sean's fantastic poster on photogrammetry, let's search for that. It's not easy to Google, so I've tried.
That looks good. Right.
Straight away we're in there. Yeah.
Cool. And we can go and have a look at that. Oh, it's a Word document. That slightly complicates things, but because I'll have to switch applications. But let's do it. What the hell?
Are you just sharing your?
Yeah, I was only sharing
the browser.
The one. Yeah. Sorry, I'll switch to that.
We may as well complete the story.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was
gone this far.
But it does illustrate one of the points we've found. So then you can get to that and find hopefully those 10 points. There you go. Lessons learned. Keep TIFFs. Ugh. All right then, if you insist. And so on. So it's going to switch back to the presentation.
That's a demo of where the publications index is at the moment, and the intention, it's in some ways it's crazy that we haven't had a good way of searching across iPres all this time. But hopefully that shows the kind of the power of bringing some of this stuff together. And of course, we want to add other sources as well. Andy, you're probably already going to go on and say something about that. Next steps.
Yeah, so if you there's a few things we're going to try and do now. We're going to try and take what we've learned, and the IPRES steering group is setting up a continuity committee to look at issues like this, like maintaining consistency between conferences and maintaining consistency in the proceedings over time. So this will be fed back to them to work out what to do in the future. So hopefully we can maintain this and make it part of IPRES's annual kind of pulse of responsibilities as it goes from year to year, and make it a thing. One of the things that Word document neatly showed is that there's a lot of inconsistency between the years and the metadata and the scope of the metadata and the way the proceedings are stored and that kind of thing. And so we can use this to demonstrate what the issues are and understand them and iron those out going forward, which is good. And particularly, what I'm interested in is in the future, and if anyone has any suggestions, there's a few in that Padlet, in that feedback form I circulated, is other information sources we should include. So, for example, at IPRES, Ethan Gates publicised his Zotero index of emulation resources, which I think could be a useful facet. So we've got IPRES as one facet of this publications index. We could add blogs. There's a lot of great digital preservation blogs which we could add. So if anyone has other sources for digital preservation information that they think would be useful to be able to cross-search in this kind of, so like a really focused search engine, right? And we can tune it to our domain and put in the things we find useful. And I think that might be quite a powerful tool. And certainly it's had quite good feedback so far.
It's really nice to act as a gentle disruptor to the way that we've been doing things. And there's already been a couple of posters at the last IPRES based on this work and some of the analysis that you can start to do from what Andy bringing all that content together. So that's obviously we're going to see more of that as well. It'd be great to be able to learn from the IPRES proceedings as a whole, and then the sort of knowledge base that's been built up there, rather than just being these sort of isolated little islands of information in PDFs. So hopefully there's much more we can do with this information as well. It's quite a funky graph that we might be able to dive into if we have time at the end, but we'll leave that for now.
Yeah, we'll see. So then we're going to talk about the registries side. So yeah, hopefully there'll be time at the end for questions if anyone's got any, but we'll continue with the presentation for now. So this here we're just trying to make clear, although we talk about registries because it's quite a common term of art in the field, we're not being too precise about it. We're being quite loose. Strictly, these are often official list of records and names. It kind of, I think through the UK government, it's kind of, and other forms, it's inherited from formal registries like land registries and other things like that. But really, we're going to start with formal registries, but any source of managed information that practitioners can depend on to do the work is in scope, in principle. We're not being too exclusive. It's just about what's practical. Which brings us to a bit of a deeper explanation of what we mean by registry. And I hand over to Paul to start.
Yeah, so some of the work that Andy's been doing around file formats actually drawn on some statistical techniques that have been from the world of ecology, and we realised there's actually quite a nice sort of parallel between file format species, if you like, and wildlife, flora and fauna. So you probably won't be surprised to hear that I'm not just geeky about digital preservation, I'm geeky about other things as well. And I'm a bird watcher and volunteer conservationist. And so I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to sort of give you one side of the coin, the sort of bird species analogy, and then Andy's going to give us the file format parallel to that. So if you are a birder, there's a lot of birds out there. So how do you identify them? Well, you use a field guide. Field guide describes how to identify a bird. So if you could give us the next slide, please, Andy. So here's a page from a field guide describing a few different birds here. There's a description of prairie falcon, and this gives you the information you need to know how to identify this particular species. Over to you, Andy.
And we have our own plumage in the world of digital registries. So the classic example being pronoun. So every species in the format ecosystem has a record, or many of them are doing pronom, and they let you know how to identify them. So that's the external signatures, like the PDF file extension, and then the internal signatures, the little special bytes at the start and end of files that let us know what we might have on our hands.
Course, this sort of ecosystem is quite complex. There's a lot of ins and outs, so that's what we are sort of trying to dig into a little bit here with these examples. There are a lot of different species out there, one field guide isn't enough. You need a few different field guides. If you give us the next slide, please, Andy. Here's another field guide on British birds, and here's a page, as we've just seen, the field guide describing the peregrine falcon. Have we got another slide? We have. Why is it back to you? Oh, yeah, here we go. So there are, across the different field guides, there is some overlap. So as we saw in the field guide to Senegal, there's a description of peregrine falcon. In the field guide to birds of Britain, there's also a description of the same species, the peregrine falcon. But in these two field guides, there are also unique entries. So there's 3 different goshawk species described in the Senegal field guide on the left here. And then there's one goshawk species, it's actually northern goshawk. This is different. So these species are unique to the field guides, indicating that you also you need to look at multiple guides as well. So there's some complexity there. Over to you, Andy.
Yeah, and so we approached our registries of formats with this in mind, and it's quite difficult to compare across them. We'll get into why a bit later, but the simplest way of doing it is just to look at the file extensions that each so these external plumage, the file extensions that every registry has. So this is some of the data from some of those sources. So FDD is the Library of Congress's format descriptions. Apache Tika has its, which is a identification and character and metadata extraction tool, has its own list of extensions. One called GitHub Linguist that is used to identify source code has another. Pronom there in the middle with 1,600 and so file extensions we probably all know quite well and is used widely to identify formats in our field. There's the file format wiki, which many of you might know. JustSolve, it's also known as JustSolve the file format problem. That has nearly 4,000. There's yet another identification tool called TRID, which has nearly 4,000. And then there lurking at the bottom is Wikidata, with 7,000 species of file extensions. And so what we found, I was looking at this and going, well, the Library of Congress dataset's tiny, even compared to the Pronom dataset. So never mind Wikidata. So presumably, like everything all of the file extensions in the Library of Congress set are inside the Pronom, like a subset kind of thing, right? And so we start to look at it. Now, give me a second to explain this diagram. This shows all the different overlaps between just Pronom and Library of Congress data sources, right? So Pronom has 1,657 extensions in it, and Library of Congress has 454. And as you'd expect, most of them are going to be unique to Pronom because Pronom's bigger, right? So there's 1,300, and there's 302 file extensions which are in both. But even though it's very small in comparison to the Pronom one, 152 of the file extensions in the Library of Congress set are unique. So and this is a recurring theme in every registry and source we've looked at, there are almost always genuine unique file extensions, which for good reason aren't in the other registries. And that gives a list of some of them there. And they're all file extensions which are perfectly legitimate, actual formats, aren't in Pronom, are in Library of Congress, and you'd miss them if you only looked at Pronom.
So another area of complexity is differences in description and inclusion of metadata between the species and between the field guides. So going back to those 2 original field guides, we've got a description of the peregrine falcon side by side. There's actually different levels of detail here. So the guide on the left describes just the appearance of the bird. There's additional metadata in the field guide on the right that describes the behavior of the bird, so more information you could use to identify it. And if you look at the description of the voice of the bird, there's only one call described on the left, but in the guide on the right, there's actually 7 calls described, so there's much more information. Back to you, Anne.
And if Paul didn't have a cold, he probably would have done some of the bird voices, but I don't think he should stretch his voice.
Let's pass on that today.
Yeah. And this is quite a subtle difference, but it can be quite important. As we mentioned, one of the kind of forms of plumage we look for is these magic bytes that are in files across, and those differ across registries as well. For example, Pronom, for a PDF file, it says what should be at the start of the file, but it also says what should be at the end. Whereas the Library of Congress only talks about what's at the start of the file, and that's also Apache Ticket does that as well. And that actually leads to different identification outcomes. So the fact that you have slightly different descriptions of the same species does have workflow consequences for people processing things. And anyone who's had a perfectly valid, well, perfectly visible, usable PDF refused to be identified by pronom has probably hit this issue about where the data is at the end of the file. Oh, and yes, I was also going to add, this is another visualization. So this is now starting to look at Wikidata, which is another data source that isn't used very heavily yet in digital preservation, but we're looking at. And what's interesting here is each of these blobs, the size of it corresponds to the number of formats that piece of software reads. So the other registries have very little software information in, where there's already quite a lot of software information in Wikidata. So there's View, which is quite an old image. I remember using it when I was a young man, and that reads like 444 different image formats. And so that's a source of information which isn't closely integrated with the other registries, but we can bring together through projects like this.
So if we dig into any digital preservation problem deep enough, we usually hit some kind of conversation about granularity, and the same can be said for species of birds. So this is a guide just about the peregrine falcon. And if you go to the next slide, please, Andy. Here's a page describing subspecies of the peregrine falcon. There are actually 20 different subspecies that can be found around the world. Sometimes that's useful information to know that the species are different, so that the subspecies found in Africa is actually quite a bit smaller than the other peregrines. It's FP minor. It's interesting to know. Many of the subspecies look very similar, and it's not an awful lot of consequence, the fact that they are different, slightly genetically different, but otherwise not a big difference to be found. Andy?
Minute. Sorry, I needed to cough. Right, and for our registries, EPUB is an interesting example. So EPUB format, unusually for program, only has one kind of top level entry. It doesn't have version-based entries. There's just a single record. And at the other extreme, the Library of Congress has multiple records for every individual version of the EPUB format. And then other ones are somewhere in between. Well, so the file format wiki, which is in the middle, the pink box there, is kind of the same as pronom, but then Wikidata is different again. The major versions, EPUB 3, EPUB 2, have distinct identities, but the subversions, EPUB 3.0, 3.01, 3.2, are just annotations within that version. So the granularity across these sources is very different, which is part of the reason we've had to use file extension as the lowest common denominator to bring this stuff together, because once you go beyond that, it gets quite messy.
So there are an awful lot of birds out there. So ultimately, you need to consult a lot of field guides. I mean, you can look at particular domains, but there's often crossover between domains. Birds migrate around the world, birds get blown off course. So even looking at particular parts of the world, it's not always going to be the way to go. So multiple sources are actually really important. Andy?
And so this is something I've been trying to support for a number of years. Nearly 10 years ago now, I built an initial format registry aggregator, which took those sources I mentioned and brought all the data together. So you could at least, if you're looking for an EPUB, you could at least find all the records across the different sources relating to EPUB. And that's something we're pursuing with this project as well. There's a new version of that. It's going to bring in more information sources and be easier to search and use, which will help people search across these different trustworthy sources of information, whilst maintaining, focus very tightly on format.
So how do we classify a format or species? Well, it's not always completely straightforward. So here's a page from the British Field Guide about redpolls. I'll just read out a little bit of blown up here. Redpoll split opinion amongst taxonomic authorities. So there isn't even a single taxonomic authorities for birds, right? Some regard the complex as comprising several species, some just one or two. In this field guide, it's actually quite recent, just a couple of years old, describes 3 different red poll species. But since this book has been published, there's been some genetic studies, we've learned more about the birds, and the taxonomic authority that this book is based on has lumped these 3 species into one. So it's a complex changing picture as we find out more about the species. Actually, things change in the way that we classify and describe them.
And this gives me an opportunity to talk about one of my favorite little bits of history of all of this is what I like to call the TIFF. Back in 2011, Pronom had noticed and had problems with TIFF files. Pronom can't tell the difference between different TIFFs, and so in fact, nothing can. It's a very difficult case to distinguish. And so if you gave it a TIFF, it wouldn't say it's a TIFF. It would say it's a TIFF 3, 4, or 5, or 6. It would give you 4 identifiers back, which a lot of people found irritating, right, and problematic, because it complicated the workflows. So Pronom took a practical step to deprecate, to discourage the use of those records and deprecate them, and shift everything over to a single record. So there'd just be a TIFF kind of top level record, and the other ones would be dropped. And you would not believe the polite anguish that was expressed. People were using those identifiers, thank you very much, and they needed them in their use case. And it was a very, I mean, I call it a tiff jokingly. It wasn't that much of an argument, but it was a valid disagreement about the right granularity of those ontologies. And sometimes, depending on context, you need one, and on a different context, you need the other. So there was no lasting cultural damage, I think, but there was a bit of a tiff for a while about TIFF.
So finally, there's kind of a notion of reciprocity. So certainly in the bird world, it's not just about consuming the information, but actually bird watching is kind of a big citizen science project of birders reporting what birds they've seen in what locations. It creates a lot of scientific information that can be analysed to learn about the species. In this example on the right, the book about the peregrine falcon has actually photographed that I contributed to it. I was involved in a rescue of this bird caught in some netting. It was okay in the end. No peregrines were harmed in the making of this presentation. A tiny contribution to a 500-page book from me. But of course, the huge number of people that contributed information to this book has really helped to advance our knowledge of this species. It's helped us to be able to learn more about it. And of course, you probably see where I'm going with this. This is really important because many of these species are endangered, right?
And we've seen the same. I mean, I'm highlighting Pronom here, but this isn't unique to Pronom, although they're probably the one with the richest community around them. Is they've done a really good job of trying to support that wider community of people and get their input and changes and additions to their registry. And Library of Congress did the same, and so do others, and sometimes. And that's exactly the kind of it's the way it links into the wider people social network, which is the kind of thing we really want to support. We want to raise these issues up and help people explore these sources and learn more about them so that we can grow the pool of people who are able and willing and excited about contributing to these things. And that's part of what led to the next thing, the thing we released at iPres, which we're going to talk about now, which is what we're calling the Digital Preservation Workbench. So I'm going to, I'll talk briefly about this and I'll switch to it, and Paul can put the link in the chat again. This is quite a broad collection of experimental tools and interfaces. It's really putting a lot of stuff out there, and we're really keen for people to play with it and let us know what's useful and what's not. We're going to look particularly at how many, which format identification tools might help you, how you can find that out, and how many formats there are in general. But it can also be like a format lookup system, help you compare your collections against other collections, look at some of the publication data, and it also provides a kind of safe place where you can play with some command line tools. So I'm going to show a bit of this, and then we'll see how we go. Give me a second to find a link.
I'll just drop the link to the workbench into the chat. So, what he wants to do.
Thank you, and I shall
There's the
try and
feedback
switch
link as well.
to the right, if I can switch to the window. So professional. It's amazing. Hope you're all
almost seamless.
Almost seamless, apart from the edges. Right. So if you go to that, it should look like this. hopefully people can see this. So this is supposed to be an introduction just to the kind of concept. And it's this idea of maybe you've got some weird files or weird file extensions and you bring them to the workbench. It pulls together these different information sources, publications, formats, and the profiles of other people's collections, which we'll briefly look at in a bit. And it helps you find information about your formats and compare collections and tools and play with tools in the cloud. So the homepage gives a bit of a taste of this. It shows you how pronom's changed over years and try to credit some of the inspirations for our work. But I'm going to dig straight into the collection profiling page. So in its here when I talk about collection profiles, I mean it's like how many what file extensions do you have and how many files with each file extension have you got? So that's what we're talking about. And it's a very simple way of profiling a set of files, but it's quite a useful way for two reasons. It can let you compare with other institutions, and it can let you compare with the format registries and the other tools and see what they might be able to contribute to your understanding. Now, of course, file extensions often cover more than one format, so it's not perfect mapping, but it gives you somewhere to start. It's often a useful starting point. So this page of the workbench has lots of kindly contributed profiles by multiple organizations, which let you explore. So that one of my favorites is the Cambridge University Library Transfer Service, and there's all sorts of weird stuff in there because it's stuff off floppies and things. It's great. You can dig around in that. But what I want to show at the moment is that you can actually profile your own files. And this all runs just runs out of the browser. It doesn't send your data anywhere. It's all local. There's this thing built in called the file system scanner, and it lets you just choose a directory on your local machine. I'm just going to choose one called the iPres Pantry and let this web page look at those files. It doesn't send the data anywhere. You can switch the internet connection off during this and it will work. And then it scans all the extensions, and then you can save. So this is the data it ends up with. It's a set of the file extensions and how many of each one you've got, and then you can save that out to a file. And now I can go back to this page. This is the collections profile page, and I can put that in and I can look at what it says about my files. Oops, I'm in the wrong place. Right, so now my uploaded file extensions appeared in the list, and it gives me a summary. There were 128 extensions, 837 files, and it understood all the extensions, which is good. Sometimes there's weird stuff in there because it's from humans, and then you can have a look at them. So this re-shows the same data we saw before. Now, I don't like these graphs because these format style graphs, they drive all the attention up here, and that's where the boring stuff is. Oh, look, it's JPEGs. Oh, look, PDF. Oh, Lord save us. Right, JSON, a bit interesting. Oh, Excel. Anyway, fine. Look, frankly, that's just going to look after itself. Okay, maybe that's too rude. But the major formats which are used to share large amounts of information are not, to me, our most pressing concern. I'm interested in this weird stuff down here, right? What we're going to do about all this weird stuff. So that's where a lot of this is all about focusing attention down there. So part of this page, I'm not going to go into this in much detail. One thing we can do is compare the collection you've uploaded against someone else's collection. I'm not going to stay long. I'm not going to look at that at the moment because it takes a little while and it's not the main thing I want to focus on. That works best when you've got like two people who have their own collections and they can talk about the differences. But what I think is most useful to talk about now is how this maps to the registry and tool coverage. So you've got all those extensions. What this part of the page tries to answer is, okay, so let's assume we start with Pronom, and that's matched 105 of those extensions, most of the files. Fine, okay, that's Pronom, good. If you were to look at all these other sources of information, which ones would bring the biggest yield? Which ones should you look at next to hit the other formats that haven't been addressed so far? And this first plot attempts to show that kind of result, which is across the bottom is the number of extensions, which is matched by a given registry, and up the top are the number of files that would match based on that. So not surprisingly, because it's large, Wikidata's up here. That's matched 118 extensions and most of the a lot of the files. And then the more useful bit is you can then dig in and look at the results. So actually, file format wiki or Wikidata would match 13 extensions. And you can go and have a poke around. And this acts as like a bulk lookup. So from here, you can then go and click through and find out more what those registries think about those files. And so you can start to learn more about the stuff that Pronom hasn't covered yet. And then you can see what Wikidata said. And I think, is it the same set? Yes, it's pretty much the same set between Wikidata and file format wiki. Then Trid has some other ones, and Ticker has one, and Library of Congress, Linguist have some other ones. So you can poke around and see what they all think, or you can save the data out. Then the kind of final part asks, okay, what if we were just to, let's take all of those information sources and we try and apply them all to this set of data. We're going to go through each in turn, and we're going to apply each one until we have applied them all, and we'll see what's left over. So this for me has been the most interesting part, because when we're now applying like 10,000 records across all of the sources, and I again assumed that would usually cover everything because between them. So Pronom, as we've said, you apply Pronom and it gets you 105 extensions. You apply either of these, FileFormat Wiki or Wikidata, and it gives you 13. But then actually in this case, using this set of files, the other registries don't offer anything. But there's still 8 left over. So this kind of visually represents that trend. It's number of files and the number of extensions which are unmatched. But the point is, this stuff's always here. Now, this one is maybe a mistake, but these are like, and I know I've checked most of these, they're genuine formats which aren't in any of the sources we have. So this is hinting at what we'll get to in a minute, is just the sheer size of the kind of registry problem, and how hard it is to cover everything in even quite modest sized collections. There's always unique stuff, almost always unique stuff. I've only found one collection where everything was in Pronom, and it broke my tool because it wasn't used to that happening, and I had to fix it so that it coped, because in every other case that had never happened. Do you want to say anything at that point, Paul? Because that's kind of part one of the demo.
No, that's great. I think you've covered that really well. We've had some nice comments in the chat, so I'm glad you guys are enjoying this. Should we sort of open it for questions at that point, or did you want to wrap up this bit, Andy?
Well, the other thing, how about we do the total diversity question?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
Okay, right.
That's kind of fun.
Yeah. So we're fine. We've got 50 minutes. So let's pull this back to that thing. Paul mentioned at the start is using ecosystem methods to understand this. So there's a thing in ecology. I don't know. So this audience, who's used a quadrat at school, right? You get a bunch of surly teenagers and you send them into the field, and you send them with a square meter of it's a quarter of a square meter of wire, and they throw it onto the grass and they count how many daisies are in each meter square. So the point is, you can randomly sample an ecosystem to understand it. So if you want to calculate the density of daisies on a field, you can do that using random sampling. And if you want to calculate the total number of species in an ecosystem, you can estimate that by random sampling. So it's the same idea. You go out, you get a big sample of species in an ecosystem, and you count how many you get, and then you go and do it again. You go a different sample of species, and you see how many new ones you get. And every time you get a few more new ones, but the number of new ones decreases over time as you head towards the total number of species in an ecosystem. So what I've done is taken that model and that methodology from ecological systems, and applied it to our registries. So if you look at each of the registries I've looked at so far, you can broadly consider them as a sample of the format ecosystem, the total global format ecosystem. And you can start to compare them with that grounds. And this was the first kind of thing I looked at in that regard, is that getting back to that uniqueness. And so I call this the kind of it's the weirdness chart of format registries. So the vertical is how many the horizontal is how many extensions there are in a given registry, And the vertical is how many of those extensions are unique to that registry and not in any of the others. So this reflects down here, you've got like Library of Congress and Pronom, which very much reflects their amazing work they're doing in prioritizing the stuff that is most common to most people. That's exactly where they should be. And they're doing a great job of doing that stuff, which is going to get the most yield across most people. And then you've got Wikidata, which of course doesn't add that many more on top, but it does have unique entries, nearly 30%. But then it's like 4 times bigger than Pronom. But then you've got the GitHub linguist up here being weird, which is nearly 50% unique entries, despite being relatively small. So with that in mind, what we then did is kind of compared. We ran the process of you take each registry in turn, build up the total number of formats and the number of new formats you're hitting when you add each registry, and estimate the total number of formats in the digital universe that we've still to go, and come up with like a conservative estimate. So should we ask anybody if they want to do a guess, or should we?
Good to,
How many formats are there?
yeah, how many formats are out there, at least?
Yes, so this is a
Anyone got any
conservative.
guesses? Type them into the chat. No pressure. Guesses. Let's dive into do it, Andy, because we've not got much time left.
Yeah, that's not anyway. So this is what the results came out at. So using the model and fitting to the model, we started off with Wikidata, and that added 7,000 registries. Then you add TRID, and that adds 600 new ones, and then so on and so on. Each one adding a few new extensions each way, and there's the 44 unique extensions to the Library of Congress set, and you fit it. And again, for multiple reasons, including that all extensions are used for multiple formats, this is very much a conservative estimate for the number of formats out there. And we expect it to be at least 12,000 formats in total, of which we've only ever categorized roughly 8,000. And Pronom in 20 years has covered 1,600 of them. So we really think this combines the evidence we have to show just how much we need to work on growing the community around these sources so that we can hope to cover more and understand more of the digital universe we're supposed to be taking care of.
Quite fun, and it's nice to see these things coming up as we're taking this work forward, to see these little opportunities to learn a little bit more about the broader picture of what we're facing out there. We've got 2 minutes left. We should probably open it up for questions. Hopefully we haven't completely overwhelmed you with this file format stuff, but has anyone got any questions for us? Yeah, Graham's guess in the chat. Thanks, Graham. Yeah, I mean, it might be a lot more than that, right? This is a lower guess from lower estimate from Andy. So, yeah, not ridiculous at all.
Yeah, can I ask how much maintenance this tool requires to keep this data up to date? Does it dynamically update, or does it require a lot of human intervention?
No, so I'm in the lucky position of having built the aggregated bit, the bit that gathers the data source and pulls them together. I wrote 10 years ago, and it's been running for 10 years, and I know how much maintenance it takes. And it's like it averages out to a few days a year, right? Yeah. It runs on GitHub. It runs every day. It pulls the sources. It's all automated, and it builds the data sets. And that's the only kind of complicated bit that needs somewhere to run. Everything else you've seen is all running in JavaScript in the web browser, and also should be good for 10 years, right? So we're trying to, everything is static files and static stuff apart from that aggregation step. That's proven to be, low maintenance over the last 10 years, and I'm trying not to complexify it too much. And then I'm trying to choose front end tools which are as stable as possible and don't require, so there's no big database here, there's no thing to be hacked. It's all running off kind of a minimal infrastructure. So I'm trying to, that's something I really want to write up as well, is I've learned a lot about trying to do that over the years, and in this project in particular. So I think that's hopefully be a useful output towards the end of the project, is different approaches for building more sustainable systems.
Yes, it's fantastic. It looks so complex. That's the immediate thing that kind of sprung to my attention. It might be complex to manage, but you make it sound as if it's easier than that. So that's.
I mean, I'm making assumptions, but I believe there are assumptions with evidence. So a lot of this is fancy pants JavaScript in the browser, right? But we also
Yeah.
have 10 to 15 years of increasingly fancy pants JavaScript in the browser, which seems to be stable, and I consider good for another 10, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's as good as it's ever going to get. So,
yeah. It's very impressive. Well done.
cool, thank you.
There's a comment in the chat referencing Tyler's work on Macintosh formats. Andy, you've done a bit on that, haven't you? So
I was
let's
going
look
to
at
show
that.
that because I got to the end of this and went, oh, 10,000 formats. Oh, that's a lot. And then Tyler turns up, iPres, and goes, oh, I've got a database of formats from the Mac days. And so this is the kind of this is kind of submarines, these waves hidden in around. And so I've done a bit of work on this. I'm working on a new version of this index of data sources across registries, and this includes Tyler's, and that's suddenly ballooned our total set of format registry unique. Well, these are not aren't unique, but the point is there's 50,000 records in this system. So if you search for something like VRML, you can search across Library of Congress and Pronom and NARA, and then see all of this stuff from Tyler's. Well, he didn't create the database; he's helping maintain and sustain it. Now, it probably isn't quite as bad as it looks, because the thing about the way the Mac works is there are type codes and creator codes. So some of these are the same format, getting multiple entries because different software wants to talk about the format slightly differently. So it might, whether it's quite as bad as all that isn't yet clear, but it was funny to come up with this lower bound of 10,000, and then for Tyler to just suddenly come along and go, I think there might be a few more than that in this historical niche, but it seems like kind of, I mean, it's a big niche, right?
We've just got a few minutes left. Are there any other questions for us? Have you got that map of the?
Oh, there we go. Sorry, Paul, I was trying to come in,
Michael,
but I'd left myself muted. No, I just said I'm
Yeah,
gonna stir the pot and wind everybody up. So I love and clearly everybody else does, the analogy, the ecological world, and I think this is all great and a fantastic tool. But on the other hand, we are all keen on this kind of stuff, and we find these kind of obscure file formats, and I don't find them interesting. And you're not concerned that in a way, by showing the vast majority of stuff falls into a handful of formats which are well supported, we risk shooting ourselves in the foot, because we present this information, a bean counter looks at it and sort of says, well, you're doing 95% of the job with stuff that's for free. We've always lost stuff. Tough. This is equivalent to the sort of Outer Hebridean peregrine falcon. We'd love to preserve it. I'd like to do what I can, but I'm afraid I can't. Yeah, it's going to die off. Suck it up. How do we counter that argument?
No, it's very good. So what my theory is, and this is where I'm looking for help. If people have, I've already come up with some good examples. Is that we have to push against that, because the distribution of value is not the same as the distribution of formats. So what it seems to be happening, and anecdotally so far this seems to be the case talking to people at iPres and beyond, is there's like a rather gnarly born digital wave coming to our institutions. We're going to get this, one of the biggest vectors is going to be like high profile donations from high profile individuals, where we're getting 30 to 40 years of different media from them in a block, right? And we're going to get, and I've talked to people who have this right now, and it's going to grow, is they're getting floppy disks, like weird floppy disks, and they're getting cloud documents, and they're like, oh, this is yours now. Welcome. This is a high profile author's papers. So I think those understanding where because that's a valid argument. If there's no value in there, then an institution is going to go, well, 95% of it's PDFs, and we're going to keep looking at PDFs for the rest of the time. I really don't want that to happen. So what I really want to do in this project as we move into the second phase is dig out kind of hidden gems, really, really interesting and gnarly and weird stuff out of the tail. And if you're not, bring it to us if you're not willing to talk about it publicly, and talk about the challenges in dealing with it, because we have to be able to articulate the value of this weird stuff. And if we can't, then maybe it won't be looked after, and that's fine. But let's check.
That's a great question. Thank you, Michael.
Well, I'm going to follow that. Oh shit! Sorry,
we're about time, so it
well,
would be lovely to chat more. Go on, very quickly, Michael.
Just picking up what you said there, Andy. So isn't there an argument for putting in that kind of time factor as well. I mean, basically, is the problem getting worse, or is it staying the same? Is it gradually clearing up? Because, you know, can we say that yet? Can we forecast to say no? Actually, we're just going to get a proliferation of formats going forward. So actually, this is something we really need to care about. But so we may be out of time. That might be for another thing. So
yeah, that's quite complicated. I think, yeah, I can't answer that in the remaining time. I think there's a problem in terms of particularly donations and born digital stuff that's been under inspected. And I think that's going to be something I need to articulate through the project.
It would be really nice to start having format profiles over time and be able to compare them over time. And I think we've got one example of that in the comparison already, but it would be great to grab a few more. We should really wrap up at that point because we've just got a couple of minutes left. Thank you everybody for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's always been fun to talk about this stuff, so we've enjoyed doing it this end as well. After the break that we've had over the Northern Hemisphere this summer for DP Connect, we're actually going to be back with DP Connect next week, so all welcome to come on for a chat. Just realised we've missed out the wrap-up stuff for our work that Andy's showing as well, so we should probably do that, but I'll just tell you what's coming up. So at DP Connect, in a month's time, we've got an absolutely fantastic DP clinic. Here's the link on that, put in the chat. Fantastic DP clinic about preserving digital art. We've got an amazing panel. We've got Savannah Campbell from Whitney, we've got Dragon Espenshide from Rhizome, we've got Patricia Falco from the Tate, Isabel Meyer from the Smithsonian. What a fantastic panel, so please come along for that. And one other thing to mention, oh yeah, we've got a DPC audiovisual special interest group on Monday as well, so please come along and join us for that if you're a DPC member. We've got 1 minute left. What we're going to wrap up from this, Andy? We should talk about feedback. That's the main thing to say, I think, isn't it?
Yes, so please, this can only work if it's genuinely practically useful, right? And I'm half an academic. I can get drawn into the big pictures. Oh, it's exciting, but it does need to be something which either drives interest usefully or is actually on the ground useful in the work, right? So please let us know what you think. Let us know what's good. Let us know what's bad. Let us know what you'd like to see done better. New data sources, new comparisons. If you want to provide, if you're willing to provide a file extension profile, particularly the more diverse and exciting, the better. So please do get in touch with any feedback or any ideas, and we'll feed it into the next cycle of work.
Perfect. Right, let's leave it there. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you soon. Take care.